is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
Now, Ross Kaminsky.
Come on, man.
On Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
I think I'll start off. Well, first of all, good morning. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. I'm Ross, and thanks for being here with me first thing on a Monday morning. For no obvious reason, Shannon and I got on the topic of something called Hanlon's Razor. And I don't really have anywhere to go with this, but I'm going to mention it anyway because it's awesome. And it relates to a phrase that I had heard before and enjoyed before, but never heard it called by the name Hanlon's Razor, clearly inspired by the much older Occam's Razor. Hanlon's Razor, I'll go to Wikipedia, is a principle or rule of thumb that says, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. And I like that idea, and I think it applies a lot to politics and politicians. But as I go through today's show, I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm feeling somewhat more serious today than I am most Mondays because I've been thinking about so much stuff over the weekend. Oh, and later this morning, in this hour, probably 6:35, I'm really looking forward to explaining why somebody on Twitter this weekend called me, and I'm quoting, a mediocre white man. I will explain that to you in about 25 minutes. I'll share the story. So, anyway, what occurred to me when Shannon said that he was a big fan of Hanlon's Razor, and then I looked it up to remind myself what it was, is that, first of all, I'm a big believer in it, right? Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. But also, and I'm sure producer Shannon is with me on this, a caveat, maybe an unnecessary one, but a caveat nonetheless is don't assume that everything that somebody does that you don't like or you find harmful or hurtful, don't assume that all of that is stupidity. Some of it could, in fact, be malice. Right, Shannon? Yeah. And I do think in today's political environment, and I don't just mean the behavior of politicians themselves, I mean a lot of the conversation that you would broadly categorize as within the world of politics and how people talk about each other, and especially how the left talks about the right, it really is malice. And in a way, malice is more dangerous because I think, I'm not sure about this, I'm still trying to work through it in my mediocre white brain. I think that malice may be a little bit less subject to remediation through conversation. I could imagine either way, you know. So I wasn't thinking about this before producer Shannon put me on it this morning. If somebody's stupid and they support, so let's just say some kind of bad policy, bad economic policy, because they're stupid. Now, there's a difference between stupid and ignorant, okay? So smart but ignorant, you know, each of these things has their own challenges. If somebody has a reasonably high IQ but is ignorant, you might be able to explain to them, here's why what you're thinking is wrong. And usually it's in a Bastiat kind of way when it comes to people on the left and economics, and that is they claim to have a good intention and they look at just the first superficial effect of a policy that they propose, but they don't think about the secondary and tertiary effects of those policies, and then we end up with something really harmful. And most democratic economic policies are that way. Some people believe them because they're stupid, and some people believe them because they're ignorant. And trying to change those minds are two somewhat different processes. Trying to change the view of a smart but ignorant person might be let's say, I'm not going to say it's more difficult or less difficult, but somewhat different than trying to change the mind of somebody who is just simply not that bright and also believes a wrong thing. And then there's this whole other category. And that is people who are not stupid. Well, they might or might not be stupid, and they might or might not be ignorant, but their primary motivation is malice. Right? The way that AOC and Ilhan Omar and the rest of the squad feel about entrepreneurs, feel about capitalists, feel about freedom in the United States of America, in fact. How do you convince someone who is motivated in large part by malice, perhaps driven by envy? For example, Ilhan Omar's anti-Semitism, almost certainly driven by envy, as so much anti-Semitism is. If somebody is motivated by a malice toward the successful, if somebody is motivated by the sentiment shared by Barack Obama and Elizabeth Warren that, quote, you didn't build that, and similar sentiments that say that when you risk your own blood, sweat, and tears, your own time, your own whatever money you have had to save up, been able to save up, and you go start a business and it turns into a success, that you should have to pay most of that gain in taxes because, quote, you didn't build that because the road that you drove on was paid for by other taxpayers who are, just by sheer bad luck to them, not as successful as you are. Now, of course, in a way, people on the left are correct that the tax system is unfair, but they're correct in the wrong way. The tax system is unfair because it's overly punitive of the successful, not insufficiently punitive of the successful. Those roads and everything else are already disproportionately paid for by upper earners, and I mean disproportionate beyond their earnings. Did you know that in the state of California, more than half of their state taxes are paid by the top 1% of earners? And somebody goes out and builds a business and gets into some upper kinds of incomes, they are going to be so punished by this system. And it's really hard to know whether the people who support that kind of punishment of success are doing it out of stupidity or out of malice. Is Elizabeth Warren stupid or malicious? Bernie Sanders, stupid or malicious? You tell me. And lest you think that it doesn't matter which they are, I think it does, because otherwise you might be in a position of a doctor who prescribes a medicine that treats an illness that is not the illness that the patient has. It's just one that has a similar symptom to the illness that the patient has. Patient has disease A and disease B, and they both cause nausea, and the doctor gives him treatment for disease A. Nausea is not going to get better. So I think it's really important to know. One other quick thing. To the extent that any of these politicians and the policies they promote and the people who support them are motivated by malice, and I think there's more of that than probably at any time in this country's history since the Civil War, and maybe even before that. To the extent we believe these people are motivated by malice, we, the people who have that malice directed at us, should do a better job of standing up against simply the malice and not just the idea. In other words, if a progressive wants to punish the successful, we need to stand up through, let's say, a punitive tax rate. We need to stand up and not just say that punitive tax rate is a bad idea economically and will lead to worse outcomes, just like your tax hikes always do. And that's right, but it's not enough. We need to stand up and say, we're done tolerating your malice. We are done accepting your assumption and your implicit claim in your policy that the people you're targeting with the policy are bad people. So, oh yeah, that's perfect. All right, so producer Shannon gave me a note that says when we were interviewing someone last week, there was a comment from somebody watching us on Facebook Live. We're up on YouTube right now. If you go to youtube.com and type in Ross Kaminsky, said the definition of conservative is, I got my money, F you. Okay, so that's both stupidity and malice, I think. The thing is, I don't know that we'd be able to talk a stupid person like this out of believing what they believe, because their hatred for people who have somewhat different political or economic views is so intense that you won't be able to get a thought through. And obviously, this is not what I'm not a conservative, but conservatism is not about, I've got my money, F you. It's about, how do we help you become self-sufficient and self-reliant so that you can make your own money and succeed and live the American dream? The left believes that the economy is a pie or a pizza or whatever you want to use as the metaphor that is of a fixed size, so that if one person gets a larger slice or two slices, it means that somebody else must get no slice or a smaller slice. That's not how this works. No matter what you think of these people politically, Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who's very different from those first two politically, didn't get rich by making other people poorer. They got rich by making other people richer. I've gone through this a lot, but just in case this ignorant, malicious person is listening right now, I guess his name is Matthew. Matthew, do you use, let's say, Microsoft Office? I'll just assume you do. How much did you pay for it? I'll assume you paid about $100. How much productivity has that generated for you? How many more hours would you have had to spend if your projects were even potentially doable without Microsoft Office or an equivalent? But let's just stick with Microsoft. If you didn't have Word and you still had to use a typewriter and correct your errors with whiteout. And you couldn't reformat a page after because you already typed it. And you had a bunch of bookkeeping to do, although I assume with a view like this that you've never met a payroll and don't understand anything about having a job, much less creating them. But imagine yourself, Matthew, as a productive person rather than as the person that you are. And imagine you had to keep records for a business in a ledger. You know, like in an old movie. And you had to take hundreds of hours over the course of a year to do that, or hire someone to take hundreds of hours over the course of a year to do that. But now you can do it by yourself in a few hours because you spent $100 on Microsoft Office. Well, that Microsoft Office, you know, all in, maybe it cost Microsoft $50 to develop your copy, right? Allocating the development costs over all the Microsoft Offices that are sold. I'm just making up a number. I have no idea what the real number really is. The marginal cost of them producing that new copy of Microsoft Office for you is close to zero, right? Copying the computer code. But they spent years developing it, and they continue to upgrade it, and there is some cost. Let's say it cost them $50. You pay $100. Bill Gates just made $50. The owners of Microsoft collectively just made $50. And you probably, by spending $100, you probably just made $10,000 or $100,000 by being able to avoid unnecessary expense, and perhaps by being able to do things that you simply wouldn't be able to do no matter how much time you had. These people got rich by making you richer. And conservatives and libertarians want you to have the opportunity to do that too. But thank you, Shannon. This is a perfect example, this guy Matthew, of being, I'm only guessing, I don't know him, but just based on his language, both stupid and malicious. I'm just saying it might be easier to change his mind if he were only stupid. It's much, much harder to deal with malicious. Okay, I'll tell you what, when we come back, a very important update. We've talked a lot about this on the show. The CDC's ban on evictions that I've said is unconstitutional.
This is Denver's Talk Station with Ross Kaminsky now. Tom Martino at 10, 630 KHOW, Denver. Now, Impact Traffic.